Someone asked me recently about my name, Áine Órga. They were asking why I chose that pseudonym of Áine and if it related to the goddess Áine and if I might talk about that, and they were asking if I had a relationship with that goddess. And honestly, I'm surprised I don't get asked this more on the channel, and most of you don't ask how to pronounce my name, which is something I get asked all the time in person, and generally everyone has just kind of accepted my name, I feel, and it's something I've never really talked that much about. So the very short answer to this question is that Áine is not actually a pseudonym, and no, I don't work with that goddess. So Áine is actually my real name. I was christened Áine. It is a name that was given to me by my parents, but there is actually a bit of a kind of pagan-y, witchy story behind the reason that I am called Áine, behind the choosing of that name, and it does relate to the goddess Áine. So I was born 5 weeks premature. My parents had talked a little bit about names before I was born. Not that much, like they had a couple of different names up in the air, and they did seem to want to choose an Irish name. Áine is an Irish name, so it is a name that comes from the Irish language, or the Gaelic language, which is a language which you may or may not know, which is completely separate from English. There's absolutely really no relationship between the two whatsoever, apart from the Latin influences into Irish. There's some words that might cross over into English from like the French influence on English, but apart from that they're very, very separate. Áine is very much a Gaelic name. There are other kind of Irish Gaelic names that are more akin to English names or more international names. Most of them are biblical. So Ireland became Christian quite early on. It was relatively early to adopt the Christian religion. And so a lot of the biblical names got Irishized, Gaelicized. That's definitely the correct term. They got Gaelicized before we actually had the kind of influx of English people kind of colonizing our country. So some of the Irish names are actually just biblical names that are kind of different to the English interpretation of biblical names, and some of them are completely separate and they're, you know, pre-Christian. Áine is a pre-Christian name. So it is kind of associated with names like Anne and Anna and sometimes even Hannah, but they're definitely not the same name. And generally speaking, I think my parents did want to choose a kind of proper Irish name, like a non-biblical, old Irish kind of name. But beyond that, I don't think they really had any clear notions. You know, I can't remember if they knew I was a girl or not, but they've never mentioned any male names that they were talking about, so I'm going to have to ask them that. I'm not actually sure if they knew my gender before I was born. I'm not sure. Or my sex, I suppose I should say. So I came along 5 weeks early, and they also had kind of not wanted to choose a name before I was born anyway. They wanted to meet me and pick a name based on how they felt what kind of name they felt that I fitted, having met this new human. And Áine was not a name, I don't think, that had come up though at all. I think they expected that they would pick a name from like the pool of ideas that they had. And Áine was not on the cards at all, and it actually got chosen specifically because I was born 5 weeks early. So I was originally supposed to be born sometime kind of early to mid-December, and my parents were on holiday. So my parents have a house down in Kerry on the west coast of Ireland. Normally they used to live, they're now living on the west coast of Ireland more often. They used to live, and I was raised on the east coast of Ireland, but they did used to go back and forth a lot between the two houses. And my mum was a teacher, and she was on her midterm break for Halloween. And they were down in the house in Kerry because my dad had a lot of flexibility to do field work. He was a geologist. They're both retired at this point, which is why I say was. And he had a lot of flexibility to do field work and to work down in Kerry. He did a lot of work down there. So he used to spend a lot of time down there whenever my mum had breaks from school. So they were down there for Halloween, and she was, 5 or 6 weeks to go and didn't think that there was any issue with her being away from the city. And then basically one night she went into labor. I'm in the middle of editing this video, and I actually feel pretty sure that I've told this story before in the channel, so if you're familiar with this, I apologize, but I feel like this is a more extensive version of the story, and it's probably handy to have it up as a separate video because wherever I did actually talk about this before is obviously lost in the middle of some other topic. So yeah, here you go. You can have it anyway. And I was born. So I was born on Halloween. I was born kind of around the early afternoon on the 31st of October. And that was what inspired my dad to call me Áine. So the goddess Áine is associated with the sun. She's associated primarily with midsummer. I believe that there is a Canuck Áine, which means the hill of Áine, somewhere in, I really should have looked all this up before I made this video, but I don't actually have my kind of Irish mythology books to hand anymore. They've all gone back to Ireland, so I don't have like my usual source books that I can kind of, have a quick look at. But there is a hill somewhere in Ireland, can't remember where, called Canuck Áine, and I do believe that there is kind of a tradition of climbing that hill or lighting a fire on top of that hill at midsummer. And yeah, she's very much associated with the summer sun. So I believe that there was a story, and I haven't ever come across this story, but my dad has told me this, and I would like to maybe delve into this and learn a bit more about it. But I believe there was a story about two sisters called Áine and Grian. And Áine was the goddess of the summer sun and Grian was the goddess of the winter sun. So they were kind of seen as like swapping over at the beginning of winter and at the beginning of summer. And in the old Gaelic Irish calendar, winter begins at Halloween, it begins at Samhain, and summer begins at Beltane, at Beltane, at the 1st of May. So that's kind of where the switch of the two sisters, of the two suns, happens. So therefore, the time when Áine is kind of in power, like in the sky, is from the 1st of May to the 31st of October. So the reason that he chose the name Áine for me was because I snuck in there. I was supposed to be a winter baby. I was supposed to be born in December. And instead I was born like literally about 3 hours, sunset at that time of year would be at around 6 p.m. maybe. So I was born about 5 hours before sunset on the 31st of October, and for the old Gaelic culture, winter begins at sunset on the 31st of October. So I just about made it. And I've always really liked that story. I kind of had a negative relationship with my name, I would say, when I was younger, when I was a kind of relatively young child. And I didn't remember having ever been told that story. My father had told me some stories about the goddess Áine, about her being connected to the summer, connected to the sun, about her being a very beautiful goddess and all of this kind of thing. But I don't remember him telling me that about Áine and Grian and how he specifically came up with that idea because of when I was born. And when I was maybe a tween, I really disliked my name. I associated it very much with school because I went to an all-Irish speaking primary and secondary school. So all the way through my school years, I was in an Irish speaking school where we had to speak Irish. It was like part of the rules. So I came to associate the Irish language with kind of authoritative figures that I didn't necessarily, just this kind of authoritarian regime that I, didn't enjoy being a part of. I didn't hugely enjoy school. I was a bright kid, but I didn't hugely enjoy going to school despite that. And I speak Irish with my dad as well, so I kind of associated it with him, but it more kind of got this negative association. I just didn't think it was cool, basically. I didn't think it was cool to only have an Irish name, because any of my friends in school who had names that were translated into the Irish versions, like for example I had a friend called Mary who was called Moira in school, which was the kind of Gallicization of the name Mary. I don't know, I was one of the few who only had the Irish name, and I just kind of felt like it just wasn't cool. And if I was going to be, when I was very, very young, like 4, 5, 6 years old, I might have thought that maybe I'll be a pop star or an actor or something, and I would have wanted a cooler name. And then later I was like, I want to be a writer and I don't want to be, burdened with this uncool name. So it wasn't until my 20s, I think, that my dad actually told me this story, which maybe he told me when I was younger and I forgot, but it actually really transformed my attitude towards the name that he and my mother had chosen for me. It kind of tied me into this mythology, and it just connected me to my birthday, which I've always been very attached to. I've always really loved the fact that I was born on Halloween. I always felt like it made me kind of spooky and cool. I did get a little bit bullied in a small way for it at school. Like kids used to tease me a bit, but mostly I just loved it and I didn't really care that they were teasing me, that they were like, oh, you're a witch, you're a ghost, which honestly I kind of liked. So yeah, I'd always had a positive association with being born at Halloween, and then my name became associated with that too, so I came to really like it. So when I was choosing a pseudonym for myself then, as kind of an online pagan, I decided, well, I'm going to stick with Áine. I think I had in the past used other names, but I just felt like, no, I want to embrace this name that I've been given that has kind of pagan roots, and I wanted to just choose a different kind of surname or something to make it more specific, that I could, you know, not just Áine, you know, 123 or Áine 88 or something. I wanted to have kind of like a full-blown pseudonym. And the reason I chose Órga is because Órga means golden, and that phrase just popped into my head. I just thought Áine Órga, which means just golden Áine, or the golden Áine. And it just popped into my head as a phrase that I thought would be associated with the goddess Áine, because she is associated with the sun and with midsummer. And I swear that I've read this somewhere, but I wasn't able to find any references to Áine Órga. I don't know, maybe at some point I will. In hindsight, I'm not totally sure that I would have chosen that name if I'd known that my persona as Áine Órga was going to become such a large part of my life, because I feel like it sounds potentially a bit big-headed if you know what it actually means, like, oh, the golden one, which is absolutely not how I meant it, obviously. I 100% just meant it to be an association with that goddess and something that I would understand what it meant. It was still something in Irish which I liked because it fit in with Áine, but Órga is relatively easy to pronounce. It's actually easier to pronounce than Áine for non-Irish speaking people. So it just stuck. It just really stuck, and I ran with it, and I never had like negative feedback on it, so I was happy enough to keep using it. So on the goddess Áine, like I said, I've never actually found a lot of literature referring to Áine relating to the sun or relating to the solstice, and I'm going to have to ask my dad what his source was on that. Mostly what you find is references to her being the fairy queen, and related to kind of the Sidhe, the Irish fairies, who are not very benevolent kind of characters. They're fairly malevolent tricksters and a kind of a tricky sort of race to deal with. They're understood to be a sort of magical race that existed in Ireland before the Gaels arrived, and who have kind of now live under the mountains, like under the ground. And she is referred to as being the queen of the fairies, but you do see that a lot. Like, you do see a lot of goddesses being referred to as such, I believe. Apparently she, in some book she is, or in somebody's collection, she is mentioned as being potentially one of the Morrigu, or the Morrigan, but so many different goddesses are associated with the Morrigan that I would take that with a pinch of salt. And she's also referred to as being the daughter of Manannán Mac Lir, who is a god who is associated with the sea. So there are kind of various different associations, but oh yeah, and there are stories that associate her with the Banshee, which, if you don't know anything about the Banshee, you can definitely Google it. It's a mythological creature in Ireland, a woman who's generally dressed in sort of a cloak, a dark cloak, often seen to be combing her hair, who comes to certain families in Ireland and will cry before a member of that family dies. So if you hear the Banshee keening, keening is kind of a sound that was traditionally made by women in Ireland when they were like grieving. They would be done at wakes over the dead body. So if you heard the Banshee keening in the night, that would mean that somebody in your family was going to die. More than likely associated with foxes. I think there's also maybe a story that if you hear a fox calling as well, that a family member might die. And female foxes, if you've ever heard a female fox crying in the night, it's absolutely terrifying sounding, and I'm willing to bet that the sound in question is in fact a female fox. But there is definitely a story about Áine combing her hair, and perhaps that's the association with the Banshee. I'm not entirely sure. As far as I know, she's a character who doesn't feature hugely in the mythological sagas. And I think a lot of the time, the kind of stories that she does get associated with, it happens a lot with gods and goddesses in Ireland. By the time the mythological sagas got written down, we were well into Christianized Ireland, and a lot of them were written down by monks. So things kind of get skewed and changed, and it can be hard to tell at the time when a particular goddess might have been revered what was actually the case and how they were actually viewed versus how they were kind of written about in well, various periods when usually kind of during the Middle Ages, most of the bulk of material is written then. Some of it's a bit older, from kind of 800 to 900 CE, but most of it's a lot older. Sorry, a lot newer, a lot was written a lot later on in kind of the Middle Ages. So yeah, there's not like a huge amount of information on Áine, and that's part of why I haven't really delved into any kind of relationship with her, because to me she's a bit of an ephemeral character. She has a couple of different associations, like I say, being Queen of the Fairies and being associated with the sun and the midsummer solstice. I have incorporated her a little bit into my midsummer solstice, and it is a strange thing to play with because it is my own name. So it almost feels like I'm kind of evoking a certain part of myself, which is often how I feel like when I'm working with deities anyway. That's kind of how I view it. But there's that extra kind of sense of that because she has the same name as me. And I do like to play with that a little bit and to kind of incorporate her into my ritual at the solstice. But apart from that, I don't have any particular relationship with the goddess Áine. And I don't know a lot of people who do, but if you do, and if you know anyone who do, then absolutely let me know in the comments below. Like I say, well, if you have any other information about other myths or stories or that she's associated with, I'd absolutely love to hear that too. Like I say, I wasn't able to kind of delve into too much detail in the books that I actually own because they're all gone back to Ireland. But yeah, I would also be interested to know any kind of UPG, like unverified personal gnosis of this goddess as well. I'd be interested to know if there's any kind of consensus relating to UPGs on her. But yeah, that's pretty much the story of why I'm called Áine and why the channel is called Áine Órga. And yeah, I hope that answered any of your questions. And like I say, if you have any questions or comments about this topic, then do let me know down below. Don't forget to like and subscribe and hit the bell button to be notified when I upload a video. Otherwise, you may not actually see my videos in your subscription feed. So, you know, hit the bell. And I'll talk to you again soon.